Corporate puts out these glossy brochures talking about frontier expeditions and pioneering xeno research. It's all just marketing, but hey, they got me. My crew and I, we've been working Xen Ops for mobile field systems for 10 years now, hunting and hauling Category 1 assets. What LEC does with them is anyone's guess, but you don't survive a decade of tracking wild beasts that want to eat you by being unprepared. You do it by trusting the people beside you and the equipment that you work with. Now, the suits who greenlit the venture class had one goal in mind. That was to exploit xeno research for profit. I'm not one to judge. It got me my job, and I gotta fire this old girl. LEC sells these on the open market, and I'll tell you, these sell faster than a patty mount at the hitching post. That tells you something. Over the years, we've upgraded this ship inside and out. An aft landing bay was added for additional ingress and egress, while the sensor arrays were upgraded to track movement through thick atmo. And since we encounter high-grav planets every other job, the engines were upgraded for optimal boost. The interiors mostly stayed the same, but we made some extra room to kick back and relax after a tough day. Those corporate suits, they look at the data logs and they see resources, cataloged wildlife, profit margins. But to us, this ship is the only boundary between a successful op and an unmarked grave in the black. Pirates, spacers, native wildlife. Everything out here is a threat. So we're loaded inside and out with weapons and gear that'll make the Freestar Rangers jealous. Heavy laser cannons, cluster missiles, and remote turrets. They've been keeping us safe for a decade, and they'll hold it down for another. Board members can keep their spreadsheets. We'll keep the keys. Heads up, boys. We're greenlit for Panac 2, asset containment. Let's go wrangle some aliens.
Alright, welcome to another LEC video. Today we're expanding the fleet with a brand new asymmetric build called the CX-19 Venture Class. This is a medium xeno-hauler build, and it's in the same family as my CX-4 InGen class from a couple years back. Like always, I've got two separate variants for you today, and we're kicking things off by putting together the PS5 variant first, then we'll tune it up with mods available for Xbox and PC throughout the build process, since both versions share about 95% of the same structure. Now, like a lot of you, my roleplay style changes depending on my mood. From a pure gameplay standpoint, I end up smuggling or bounty hunting a lot just because Starfield's mechanics naturally lean that way, but if the game had the right features, my absolute dream roleplay would be to run a high-stakes corporate expedition team, very much like the hunters and the operators that you see from the Lost World Jurassic Park. I actually use the vehicles in that movie as the primary influence for the aesthetic of the Venture build, as well as that InGen class that I mentioned earlier. The overall profile and shape was inspired by a Reddit build called the Kyuga. I don't normally do ships in this straight fuselage profile, but I really like how Procyon Lotor did it for his build, so I used that as a foundation, but leans more into asymmetry to match the Duneraker. Now we all have our own headcanons, right? So you can think of LEC as this vertically integrated megacorp that's a mix of that Weyland-Yutani corporate reach from Aliens, with the RDA's resource security and mining operations from Avatar, and InGen's field operations from Jurassic Park, all mixed in with Lindan Engineering Corporation from Star Wars. Instead of just building ships, LEC handles the entire pipeline. Alright, now moving on to the details. The PS5 version of the ship, or the commercial variant, sits at 84 meters long and 38 meters wide, while the Xbox PC variant, or the mobile field systems upgraded variant, is 2 meters wider. Both feature the same 3-deck layout, but there will be a minor hab difference depending on your cockpit selection, but I'll get into more detail when the time comes. With the hab selection, both ships are able to crew up to 10, but as far as the actual interior accommodations go, this ship is designed to crew up to 7. Habs are one of the interchangeable parts, so you can choose whichever ones you prefer. Now this is going to be a pricey build, just because it requires a lot of parts. The PS5 variant is going to set you back a little over 1 million credits for the Class B version and about 100k more for the Class C version. The Xbox PC variant is well over 1.6 million credits, but as usual, the most expensive parts are weapons and components. These are always interchangeable, so just use whatever you can afford or whatever is available to you based on your level and skill ranks. I tend to stick with the best version of each component for my ships, so if you want to follow this exactly, you'll also need level 60 along with Starship Design 4. But again, just use whatever you have access to. The reason why I'm providing a Class B and Class C version is because this is a heavy ship, and vanilla Class B engines are not going to cut it on the mobility side unless you use mods to buff the engines. There are plenty of mods that do this, so if you want to keep that Class B design, then just download one of those mods. And the only differences between the Class B and Class C versions are the reactor and the engine nacelle design, but I'll explain more when we get to that part of the build process. As far as where to build this, you just need to go to Falkland Systems in the commercial district of New Atlantis to purchase the NG-15 landing gear and the Falkland parts. Then you can build the rest of the ship at an outpost landing pad. If you're not using Falkland, then just head to New Homestead first for the landing gear, then build the rest at your outpost. And if you're using Antares Supra, then you also need to stop by the Sundered Reef Star Station for the bridge. But the good thing is, if you already have the Falkland parts, then you can build the rest of the ship at that location too. All versions of the ship use Falkland Systems, which is a paid mod that costs 500 credits, and ASC Deimos, which costs 400 credits. Falkland is obviously used for the Habs, but hardly anywhere else, just for a weapon slot and the 2 Cowl Ds in the rear. If you want to substitute those Cowl Ds for anything similar, like other cowlings or caps, you can do that, and then you'll save 500 credits on this build because you can substitute the Habs, the cockpit, and the weapons for non-Falkland versions. The Xbox PC variant will also use Antares Fulcrum, which costs 400 credits, and Antares Supra, which costs 1000 credits. But just like Falkland, these are completely optional because Fulcrum is only used for the engines while Supra is only used for the bridge. For the free mods, you're going to need the usual ones that I've listed on the screen, and if you're doing modded builds, just always have these in your load order. Depending on your landing bay selections, the PS5 variant is also going to need Stroud Premium Edition for the door entry landing bay, while Xbox and PC players are going to have more options here. I'm using a mix of one-of-a-kind ships for the forward bay and multiple landing bays to add that aft landing bay. Xbox and PC players were also going to be using Intrinity Aeroworks, so make sure you have the Intrinity Aeroworks fix patch by OG Tennessee, otherwise your game is going to crash. Now this isn't going to be a beginner-friendly build, just because it goes beyond the max size limit for vanilla shipbuilding, so it's pretty big, and then there's just going to be a ton of merging too. It's a pretty straightforward build process nonetheless, and I'll be providing both text and vocal instructions throughout. But always remember, if you have any questions or if you get stuck anywhere, feel free to reach out to me in the comments. As usual, we start the build off with a landing bay. I recommend using a door entry landing bay so you don't need an extra ladder to access Deck 1. PS5 players, you're limited on this, and I recommend using the 134 LSE Landing Bay A from Stroud Premium Edition. Xbox and PC players, we have options, so choose whichever one you prefer. I'm going to be going with the one-of-a-kind Hope 4.1 XL Landing Bay for the front. Deck 1 is a utility deck, and since this is a xeno-hauler build, I'll be using the 2x1 Xeno Warfare Raptor Lab from Owl Tech, and an empty Hope Tech control station that I'm going to be decorating with a similar theme. Xbox and PC players, because we are adding a second landing bay, we're going to be limited to 2 2x1 Habs here. But for PS5 players, you have enough space for a 3x1 Hab on the port side. I'm sticking with the Hope Tech theme for Deck 1 and Falkland for Decks 2 and 3. Xbox and PC players, just a heads up, you'll find the secondary landing bays in the Gear tab. So just to clarify, for PS5 players on the port side, you're going to use a 3x1 Hab followed by another Deimos belly. And for this Hab, I recommend using the 3x1 Cargo Bay Airlock Hab from Owl Tech Nautilus. 2 is a second utility deck, but with a standard 2x3 layout that contains the ship's cargo hold, med bay, the armory, and a lounge. This would also be a good habitation deck, but I have crew habitation on deck 3 with the flight deck. If you are using place doors yourself, add all your door and ladder markers between the halves. I'm also adding passway markers to the sides of the starboard 2x1 empty hab that I'm using, and another passway marker in front of the 1x1 empty hab that I will use for an armory. I'm adding these passway markers to the habs because I want to flatten interior wall space for the sake of decorations, so you don't have to do this if you don't care about decorating. Deck 3 is the main deck for the crew habitation and operations. I'm using a 2x2 living quarters that connects to a 2x1 control station, and from the control station there will be access to the crew quarters. And I'm using a 1x1 quad berth and a 1x1 double berth for crew habitation. So there's 6 beds plus 1 in the living quarters for up to 7 crew on this ship. For cockpits, PS5 players, I recommend just sticking with either the Kestrel cockpit or the Swift bridge from Falkland. If you use the Kestrel cockpit, swap out the 2x1 control station for a 1x1 hab because the Kestrel is too long and it's going to stick out. Also, use the B variant for the Kestrel, which has a side door so that you can access the double berth that's on the side of the cockpit. For Xbox PC, again we have options. I prefer to keep interior themes consistent, so I'm using the Falkland version of the Halberd bridge from Antares Supra. If you use vanilla bridges with doors, pay attention to the bridge to hab connection. As you can see, there's some wiggle room. If you get the error for the cockpit or docker not being connected to the landing bay, just wiggle the bridge between these connections because one of them is the right connection. Okay, I'm going to chime in again. We're about to do our first merging technique, which I call stack plus shift. To keep things simple, first we're going to level the nose cap B and one of the components at the right Y-axis level by attaching them and removing them from the Deck 2 habs. If you want this to be a Class C ship, then use a Class C reactor, but I recommend using a 1x1 size reactor, and TIG has a Class C reactor that's perfect for this. Next, stack the reactor, fuel tank, grav drive, and cargo hold behind the port side nose cap B. Select the first 2 components and shift them forward until the first one merges into the cap. The stack plus shift method allows you to merge a part as long as another part is adjacent to it. So attach the grav drive to the fuel tank next and repeat the process. Same with the cargo hold to the grav drive. And then you can just duplicate a second cargo hold in to merge that first cargo hold. This is called stack plus shift, and we're going to be doing this multiple times throughout the build, so remember this. This next part is where we're going to see the first visible differences between the Xbox PC and PS5 variants. We need to cover the Deck 3 halves with large pieces. So first, we're going to use Stroud Nosecap Bs and Nosecap 2Bs to do this. Attach a right side up Cap B over the cockpit, then attach a reverse upside down Cap 2B behind it. Duplicate the Cap 2B and rotate and flip it until it's right side up and in the forward position. Then merge it into the first Cap 2B, where it will snap to the Deck 3 halves below. Then we'll use Select plus Shift to merge a second Cap B into the first one. So you want to merge the second cap into the first one, or just place it close by, then select all on the ship to highlight everything, and shift the ship over to the cap until it snaps and merges into the first cap. For Xbox PC, we're going to use Trinity Deimos parts instead. So rather than the Cap 2Bs, we're going to use 2x1 holes, and rather than the caps, we're going to merge the M shrunk dish into a bow using the same Select plus Shift technique. So place the bow first, then the M shrunk dish nearby, select all on the ship, and shift it over to the dish, and it'll snap into place. Next up is the engines, and this is where we see the biggest differences between the variants. Xbox and PC players, you're going to have to stick with the non-Antares Fulcrum setups, at least until Antares Fulcrum gets ported over to PS5, but all of the options look really good in my opinion. We'll do the PS5 version first, which will utilize the Class B Nova 1050 engines. The Class B version is going to utilize 4 of them, while the Class C version uses 2 of them, plus some TIG engine boosters. After that, we'll do the Fulcrum version in the Engines Part 2B chapter. Then in the Engines Part 3 chapter, we'll meet back up to build out the rest of the ship where everything else is the same. Okay, first we're going to do the Class B setup. Now we're going to be using 4 Nova 1050 engines for this, but your mobility is still going to be in the mid-40s. So if you want to do this setup, I recommend downloading mods that buff engine performance. Darkstar is a perfect mod for this, but there are free mods available on all platforms as well. And this is why I'm also providing a Class C version for you PS5 players. So start by attaching a mini bracer in between a Tayo braking thruster and a Nova 1050 engine. Attach the mini bracer on the lower snapping points, then add a vertical stack of 3 more mini bracers next to it. And attach a cube to the top mini bracer. Then we'll add a flipped decorative Ulysses M50 fuel tank to the side of the cube. Add Hoptech pipes in front and behind the TIG cube. Then add an equipment plate with a decorative light sight laser A on top of the cube. Duplicate the entire engine nacelle and mirror the orientation for the starboard side. Now remove the mini bracer on top and attach another cube to that first cube that was already there. Then reattach the mini bracer where it's just going to snap to the one that's below it. And then we're going to attach the nacelles to the pylons. You want the cube that we just added to attach to the middle pylon, while the mini bracer merges into that pylon. This is essentially a stack plus shift technique, but just slightly different. And then you're going to repeat the process for the starboard side. Very simple. The Class C version is even easier. Just place 2 mini bracers back to back in between a Tayo braking thruster and a Nova 1050 engine. Then merge a TIG Class M quark booster in between the braking thruster and the engine, and then you're good to go. Just duplicate and mirror this for the starboard side if you want to use this Class C setup. first part could get a little tricky, but just think about the stack plus shift technique when we do this. First, remove this bottom mini bracer that's in between the rear pylons. What we're going to try and do is merge this mini bracer into the cubes that are underneath the decorative reactors. And what we want is for this mini bracer to merge into the rear 3 cubes and attach directly behind the first cube. Again, we're going to use stack plus shift to do this, and it might take some trial and error, but you just got to fiddle around with it. Once you get the placement right, we're going to reattach the mini bracer back to where it was between those rear lower pylons, but with all the decorative reactors on top. So select all and then reattach. Okay, now we're going to install one of the weapons. I'm going to be using missiles here, and there's going to be 2 placements total, one on each side of the fuselage. I'm going to attach them to the side and use the thruster variant of the NG-15 landing gear to act as missile launch tubes for these missiles. Since we can install up to 4 of them, I'm going to merge multiple into each other. The problem is, when you duplicate weapons, they like to snap into weird places. Since these are going on an equipment plate, we need to cover the rear snapping point with something that doesn't have a snapping point, and a porthole is perfect for this. So attach the porthole, and now we can duplicate the weapon without it snapping randomly. Just merge the second one into the first one, and no other tricks are needed. Weapons just merge automatically for some reason, but that said, if you misalign the placement, they will snap misaligned. It's no big deal for this because we're going to be covering these up anyways with the landing gear, but just for future reference, when you duplicate weapons, you want to merge them as closely together as possible. After the weapons are installed, duplicate the rear NG-15s and switch them to the variant with the thrusters. Then use Select plus Shift to snap them to the side of the ship covering the missiles. And then reattach the cowling 1LAs that we removed earlier. made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I don't usually do ships in this style, but I thought Procyon Lotor built a really cool ship, and I kinda wanted to do something similar without doing a direct recreation of it. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out for a freighter build, and really happy with the lower deck interior. I thought that makeshift vehicle hangar and the Xeno cages came out pretty nicely too. Would have liked to have larger ones, but we don't really have the proper mechanics for this anyways, even with a mod like Xenomaster, so it's more form over function. Also, since the Owltech mod wasn't around when I built the Duneraker, I've always wanted to do a similar build that incorporated the Xeno Warfare Raptor Hab because it's totally inspired by Jurassic Park. Personally, I'm actually a huge fan of overlanding and camping, and so the whole Lost World Field Expedition team vibe is something that I love to bring into my exploration builds. Now I'll try and pick up my upload schedule again. I've just been a little busy, but the uploads should pick back up when I start including the No Man's Sky Corvette builds again later this month, hopefully. Still working on a couple more Starfield videos, including an outpost guide, so stay tuned for those. Other than that, I don't think I have any more updates, but I'll continue to post updates about new ship-related mods and mods that get ported to PS5 as they come out in batches. Okay, thank you for tuning in, and as always, feel free to reach out to me in the comments if you have any questions or build requests, or if you just want to chat all things Starfield and No Man's Sky shipbuilding. This is Lindan, signing off. See you in the Starfield.